Hey, friend, can I ask you something? Have you ever walked away from a church service or a conversation with a spiritual leader and felt heavy? Like something was off, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it? And then maybe you brushed it aside thinking, I'm probably just being too sensitive, or I need to have more faith. I've been there. And what I've discovered through my own journey and walking alongside hundreds of women is that we often dismiss our spiritual discomfort when we should actually be paying attention to it. Here's something that might surprise you. Recent research shows that about 1 in 3 adults in America have experienced some form of religious trauma in their lifetime. But here's the thing that breaks my heart. Most Christian women don't even realize that that's what they're carrying. Today, I want to have a gentle conversation about what religious trauma actually looks like, especially for those of us who love God, but sometimes feel confused about our faith experiences. Because I've learned that you can't heal what you can't name. And once you have the language for what happened, everything can start to shift. Welcome to Healing Religious Trauma, the podcast for Christian women ready to heal without losing their faith. If you're feeling the weight of spiritual pressure and distant from the God you used to trust, you're in the right place. I'm Debra, spiritual healing coach, founder of the Healing Religious Trauma Circle, and someone who's walked the hard road of untangling toxic faith. If you're ready to make sense of your story, find peace with a safe, loving God, and hear stories that remind you you're not alone, grab your tea, toss the rule book, and let's go. Before we dive in today, I want you to know about something I created specifically for women like you. Women who love God but feel worn down by religious rules, shame, or silence. It's my book, He is Enough. And it's not a theology book or a rule book. It's a redemptive memoir and spiritual healing guide that helps you name the invisible aftershocks of religious trauma. Inside, I help you identify the 12 hidden barriers that keep faithful women stuck in fear, silence, and self-doubt. Because you can't heal what you can't name. And this book gives you the language to name what happened, how it shaped you, and where your healing can begin. When you grab your copy at HeIsEnoughBook.com, you'll also receive the audiobook, a bonus mini course, access to weekly reading circles I personally host, and entry into our private support community. It's just $17. It's your gentle first step into clarity and healing. Visit HeIsEnoughBook.com and claim your seat at the table of healing. You don't have to walk this alone. You know, for years, I had people in my life, loving, gentle people, who would carefully, tenderly try to point things out to me. They'd say things like, Debra, that doesn't sound quite right. Or, honey, I'm not sure that's how God really sees you. But I couldn't hear them. It felt too scary, too threatening to everything I'd built my life on. I'd smile politely and change the subject, or quietly pray that God would help them understand things the way I did. Then my world completely fell apart. Everything I thought was solid, everything I'd given my life to, gone. And in that dark, broken place, something interesting happened. I became softer, less defensive. When you've lost everything, and you're still breathing, you realize maybe some of your old ways of thinking don't have to be carved in stone. Slowly, carefully, I started listening to those loving voices again. And God, oh, this is the beautiful part. I realized I didn't have to keep him in all the tiny boxes I'd built for him. He was so much bigger, so much kinder than I'd been taught. But even then, even as I began to heal, I still didn't have words for what had happened to me. I was loyal. I didn't speak ill of anyone. I just quietly worked on my own heart. Then one day, my daughter sent me a video. She'd been lovingly dropping little breadcrumbs of truth for so long. But this time was different. The video was about a specific type of spiritual abuse. And as I listened, I felt like someone was reading my journal. Every single thing they described, I'd lived it. The tactics, the confusion, the way it made me question my own reality. I remember sitting there with tears streaming down my face. Not from sadness, but from relief. Because for the first time, I had language for my experience. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overly sensitive. I wasn't rebellious for being confused. And in that moment, I knew I was going to heal completely. And I knew I was going to help other women find the same relief I felt that day. The relief of finally having words for something that had been nameless for so long. You know, I think one of the hardest things about religious trauma is that it can be so subtle. We're not always talking about the extreme cases you hear about on the news. Sometimes it's much quieter than that. Okay, as we dive in today, I want to talk about 3 different points. The first point I want to talk about is what religious trauma really looks like. So, what exactly are we talking about when we say religious trauma? Well, let me share how I've come to understand it after many years of my own healing and walking with so many women through theirs. Religious trauma is basically any harm, emotional, psychological, sometimes even physical, that comes from religious experiences, beliefs, or practices. But here's how I define it in a way that feels more personal. It's any action, word, or behavior from someone in spiritual authority that misrepresents who God really is and creates painful patterns in how we relate to Him and others. I know that might feel heavy to hear, but stay with me here. This could look like growing up in a home where God was presented as angry and punitive. It might be experiencing shame-based teaching that made you feel like you could never be good enough. Sometimes it's subtle things like being told your emotions are too much, or that questioning anything means you're rebellious. And here's what I want you to know. If any of this resonates, it doesn't mean the people in your life were intentionally trying to hurt you. Often, they were passing down what was passed down to them. But that doesn't make the impact any less real. Okay, and here's the second point. Why we don't recognize it. Now, you might be wondering, if this affects so many people, why don't we talk about it more? That's such a good question. The research I mentioned earlier, it found that 33 to 37% of American adults have experienced this at some point. And women, oh sweet friend, women tend to experience higher rates of earlier spiritual trauma than men do. But here's the thing. Most of us have been taught to blame ourselves instead of recognizing harmful patterns. Think about it. How many times were you told that questioning was rebellion? That your emotions were too much? That if you were struggling, you just needed to pray harder or have more faith? We learn to turn our pain inward instead of recognizing when something external was actually causing harm. I remember so many women telling me things like this. I thought I was just too sensitive, or I figured I was the problem. But what if, and hear me on this, what if your sensitivity was actually picking up on something that really was wrong? Okay, and here's the third point. Learning to trust your inner voice again. This brings me to something really important. One of the biggest challenges after religious trauma is learning to distinguish between God's true voice and the voices that have caused us harm. Here's what I've learned. God's conviction always comes wrapped in His love. It draws us toward Him with hope and the promise of healing. When God speaks to our hearts about areas that need growth, there's always mercy there. There's always a path forward, always the assurance of His love. But the voice of religious trauma, it condemns. It leaves us feeling hopeless, worthless, afraid. It makes us want to hide from God instead of run to Him. If you're listening to this and feeling confused about which voice is which, can I give you permission to start small? Pay attention to how different spiritual messages make you feel in your body. Does this make you feel closer to God or farther away? Does it leave you with hope or with shame? Your heart knows the difference, even when your mind is still figuring it out. So let's just wrap this up. Here's what I want you to walk away with today. If you've experienced religious trauma, it's not your fault. The confusion you've felt, the questions you've had, the sense that something wasn't quite right, that's not rebellion or lack of faith. That's often your soul recognizing that something that claimed to represent God actually misrepresented Him. And the beautiful thing is, once we can name what happened, we can start to heal from it. We can begin to separate the harmful messages from God's true heart toward us. We can come home to the God who has been loving us all along. Hey friend, if this episode encouraged you and made you feel a little less alone, would you share it with someone who needs that too? And while you're at it, would you please leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts? It's like a virtual hug that helps more women find their way here. Next week, we're starting our 3-part series on the healing pillars that can transform your spiritual journey. Starting with unravel the trauma, then instill the truth, and then create a new story. These episodes will give you the roadmap from religious trauma to spiritual freedom. Until then, remember, you're not too sensitive, you're not broken, and you're not alone. Keep asking questions, keep seeking truth, and keep believing that healing is possible. I'll see you next time.